Let's talk about prison. Good morning. King Me writes, thank you for doing this video. I'd love to hear more about prison and what you've noticed / experienced. I have an interest in doing psychiatric nurse practitioner work in corrections, but I also have a lot of questions. Well, I'm here to answer some questions for you. And given that you want to be a nurse practitioner, you're going to be a little bit different than maybe psych in general. Hi, my name is Dr. Natalie Jones. I spent several years working in corrections. And so I want to answer some questions. Depending on what state you're in, too, I think things vary a lot. When it comes to ranking of people who work in prison, and I worked in California, psychiatrists have the most ranking power and authority, and so because it's so difficult to get a psychiatrist, so usually psychiatrists are they're usually paid. Psychiatrists are paid the most, and there's a lot of catering to psychiatrists. So what that means is, like, everybody else under them as far as mental health has to carry a huger portion of the workload, if that makes sense. It changed a lot. I left during COVID, so things also changed a lot during COVID. When I was there, I was also part of the union. And so part of, working with the union is I was advocating for, at least for there to be a hybrid, but also given the option to work from home. I think a lot of people now have that option before, whereas previously they didn't. The only people that really had that option at the institution where I worked was psychiatry. And so maybe there's, a little bit more advancement in that area. Bringing up the union for us, psychologists, social workers and such, there's a lot to be desired there in terms of advocating for people who work there. What I will say is inmates are there and they know the rules. Inmates have repercussions for their actions and they know that. So I would say, for me, inmates weren't the biggest challenge. And I had the most difficult, one of the most difficult caseloads when I was there because I was a good clinician. So when you're a good clinician, when you're really good at your job, when you show up and do your work every day, they give you the most difficult cases to manage. And so that inmates weren't typically a challenge for me. Who you do have to worry about and who can be a challenge are people that work there. You could very quickly go from pet to threat there when it, as many Black women know this, with supervisors and things like that who view you as a threat. If you have outside employment and things of that nature, they could try to interfere with that. And I've had that happen to me because I've been in private practice for longer than I was in prison. And so there was a lot of things that they don't, sometimes employers don't want you to be great elsewhere. They kind of want you to commit to them and only to them. And so they can be a bit punitive in that regard. Also too, at that place where I worked, it was a good old boy institution. So there, I can count on one hand how many Black people work there, including myself. Again, that depends on where you work because not all institutions are like that. But anything that you see on the OSHA board and all of that kind of stuff, it kind of goes out the door when you have that good old boy culture. People say whatever they want to say and those kind of things. And so you just have to navigate that. One of the things, I was always professional where I worked, and people were always sort of checking for me to be professional, from how I looked and dressed to how I worked with the inmates, all of that kind of stuff. People are always checking for me. Again, once again, as I stated before, I think we can all tell the reasons why, which is fine. I don't have a problem with that. Um, um, but people always look, they're always watching you 24/7. Even when you think you're not being watched, you're being watched. Um, so that, all that to say that, like, when there's other people there that like flirt with COs and flirt with other staff members, they're going to see that. They're going to have conversations about that. They're going to, make some judgments on you based upon that. And I've seen that happen many times over. My best advice to you is to get in, do your job, and go home. Do not make friends there. Unfortunately, I didn't follow that advice. I had a friend there. And one of the things that happens with people is they become, I learned the hard way that they become way too overfamiliar with inmates, which is where people are divulging, civilians are divulging personal information to inmates. They're bringing in contraband. They're giving inmates information about you. That sort of stuff. So, my advice to you, get in, do your job, and go home, be professional, but go home and don't sort of fraternize with people. If you can help it, that would be my advice to you. But I think, in my experience, inmates typically respect you if you respect them. Like when you first get to meet a lot of inmates, there could be like some power dynamic struggles for the simple fact that you're an authority figure and they don't like that. That's one thing. But also, too, more of my challenges were with Black inmates than any other race. And I think it's because Black inmates want to show that they could dominate another Black professional and make an example out of me, just to show that authority against me. So some of them were more challenging than others. But again, all things being equal, they respect you if you respect them. Part of my work there was I also had to be a disciplinarian, in addition to being a clinician. And it turns out that men really like punishment. In prison they really like it. That wasn't on my bingo card. All things being equal, of course, meaning that, like, as long as you're fair in your punishment, right, or disciplinary, whatever you want to call it, as long as you're fair, meaning that you would do the same thing for anybody who committed the same infraction, that kind of stuff. You're not playing favorites and things like that. And so it turns out that people really like that. And they even like it so much so that, like, their friends would come and start to telling them and stuff. And, people want to see them get in trouble in public, that kind of stuff. So it's really interesting to see that. So people really like safety, balance, and order. So they really gravitate to that. And that really helps, like, inmates who are not motivational. There's a lot of people when I came in that did not know how to read and write and lacked motivation. Prison is a lot like parenting, I think, in a controlled environment. And so when people lack structure, like, a lot of times there's a high turnover in people that work there. And so if there's high turnover, they're getting a new person every week. And so it's like, oh, I'm not going to bother connecting with you or doing anything because it's just going to be a new person in and out anyway. But if you come to work, you have expectations, then they become motivated to change, if that makes sense. And so I can speak more about any of these things if you like. But yeah, I think that's one thing to say. There's always a balance between custody and, like, any other personnel that comes on site. For me, custody didn't like mental health too much because they felt like mental health interfered with a lot of things, and so they didn't really like that. So there's a delicate balance between being a clinician and being a staff person and working with an interdisciplinary treatment team. Hopefully that helps.